Ask Reddit. Hey Reddit, when did your "something's not right here" gut feeling ever save you? It can become your only personality trait. I woke up from a deep sleep at like 2 a.m. during a winter storm. Something wasn't right. I immediately went looking for my senior dog and couldn't find her anywhere in the house. My roommates had a tendency to let her out for a walk and forget about her. Closing the door, I ran to the front of the house and found her laying on the welcome mat. She was hardly breathing and covered in snow. She had been outside alone for at the very least 5 hours. I moved out shortly after. I was learning violin when I was about 10 from an instructor at my local music shop. I got the weirdest feeling from him even though he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. I wanted to vomit every time I looked at him, especially his hands. After 4 lessons I told my parents that I had a terrible feeling about him and I never wanted to go back. Luckily, they listened and didn't make me ever go to him again. A few years later he was arrested for molesting multiple of his students. I have no idea how I knew something was off. He never did or said anything but I just felt it. Demotivation in heavy consumers. It is fine in moderation, but multiple times per day seems to suck the ambition from most people I've seen, including myself long ago. I've noticed after the initial uptick in chatter people tend to get really quiet and zoned out in their own thoughts. When I used to smoke it, I found it had a dulling effect on my personality and conversational skills after the fact. 2. Any of the kids, 7 of us, can play with any toy that is left out. The owner of the toy can't take it back until whoever's playing with it is done. If the toy is put away in the owner's room, permission must be asked. Was sitting on one of those metal cylindrical electricity boxes outside my house when there was a blackout. Electricity was slightly flickering in my house. No other houses had a blackout. I looked down at what I was sitting on and I was like, maybe this is the source of the problem. I stood up and stepped away from it and like 2 seconds later it fucking blew up. Like a pillar of flame shot out and above it for almost a full minute. It was basically a gigantic Bunsen burner and I was a few seconds short of physically getting fried. Weed is for people that have found their way in life. It's not for people who are looking for the way, my uncle. In other words, as fun as it may seem when you're young, get your shit together first: education, family, career, etc. Edit. Thanks for the gilding, kind strangers. And for those of you who have taken offense, relax. I'm glad it all worked out for you. All my sympathies if it didn't. Regardless, weed can for most people take your motivation and drive away if it's taken up and consumed in high volumes at an early age. It's just think it isn't a good idea. I think if you're ripping bongs every day from 16 up through high school. I was walking out of a grocery store when I saw this kid about to cross the road. Something came over me and I yanked him back onto the sidewalk. Not even a second later a truck came flying past. He was probably around 7 or 8-ish. There's a very fun road that gets you from Niedendorf to Vach or back. In Germany, you can go 50 or 60 clicks along smooth tight turns and little rolling hills. All around it for acres and acres of fields of whatever's in season and no intersections for several kilometers. It's a very fun road to go too fast on. This day, something like wheat was in and it was high. I couldn't see around the corners, but I knew the road well and was staying in my lane. And I was going fast and smiling. About halfway in, I heard a voice in my head as clear as if the speaker was sitting next to me and it said, "You need to slow down." It was startling and I braked immediately. 2 seconds later I come through one of the turns and into the arse end of a combine taking up both lanes and moving slowly. I barely stopped in time. Those extra 2 seconds of brake time saved a Volvo at least. But I'm pretty sure they saved my life too. I went out with my best friend on New Year's last year and were having drinks with her friends when I realized I was out of cigarettes. I left for a few minutes to walk over and grab a pack and ended up talking to a homeless guy for a while. And when I went over to the entrance of the bar, she was outside and said something mean to me for no reason and walked off. I was confused, so I decided it would be good if I took a walk to let her cool off and then figure out what she was upset about. I was going to walk down the street for a bit, but something told me to turn left, walking behind the bar and then turning to the side of the bar when I see a girl laying down on the sidewalk and people walking by her. As I'm walking over to help, I realize it's my friend and she's not very conscious. She was probably drugged while I was getting smokes, and who knows what would have happened if I hadn't decided to go that way. Scares the shit out of me. As a pretty consistent weed smoker, I don't like when people say that weed isn't addicting. They're right in saying that it's not addictive chemically like nicotine or something. You can still get addicted to not being sober. It makes you okay with being just okay. I was walking to the barbershop, and for some reason, everything just felt off. I ignored the feeling, but every step I took just made me feel like something wasn't right. So I decided to just go grab some food and come back. While I was eating, I saw police cars and ambulances driving to around where I was before. It turns out there was a murder. Now I always listen to my gut feeling. Frequent heavy use can affect your motivation and mood, even during periods of not being high. It is habit-forming, not technically addictive, but for some it can be habit-forming in maladaptive ways. Bad for your lungs if you inhale combusted flour. It didn't save me, but I saved someone else. When I was 6, my brother, 8 at the time, and I would go to my grandma's house while our mum worked late some nights. Anyway, one day I was just randomly thinking about fire alarms. I don't know what caused me to think about it, but after I started I couldn't stop. I have ADHD and this super focus thing, so whenever I'm thinking about something as simple as fire alarms, it consumes my mind. I asked my grandma and she said she hadn't tested hers in a while. Just for kicks she did, and sure enough the batters were dead. She replaced the batters and made sure they worked. The very next morning her house caught on fire while she was asleep. If she didn't hear the fire alarms, she would have been trapped in her room on the 2nd story. Without a phone or any way to contact help, she most likely would have died. I always make sure fire detectors, alarms work in my house now. Edit. Batteries *. Forgot one. About 10 years ago, working security at a site about 50 miles from home. Got off shift at midnight, and didn't bother to change out of uniform because I was only going to stop for gas. 2 stations in the town I was working in were open after midnight. But it slipped my mind as I drove past the first one. Pulled into the other. Same brand, same gas price, same sort of dump entirely. And just didn't like something about it. Nobody else around Betty Clark that I could see. But I decided to go back to the other one. Topped off and headed back out of town. I get close to that station again. 3 city cop cars. 2 deputies and a state trooper are outside blocking the road with guns drawn. Turns out a city cop walked in on a robbery. Dude put a bullet in his vest, and the store owner knocked the robber out cold with the bat before the cop could recover enough to get his gun out. That would have been me, in a uniform with a nice shiny badge, but no body armor, so it technically didn't save me. It would have. Anyway, A couple months after my 10th birthday, we went on family vacation to visit my dad's side of the family. They lived a state away. My mum was about 6 months pregnant with my only baby brother at the time. We got to our hotel at about 2 o'clock, and by 3 o'clock we decided we wanted to make the most of the day and go to the aquarium. I got fully dressed and ready to go, and suddenly I was hit with this crippling feeling of dread. At that age I'd never experienced anything like it. Pure anxiety. But I just fucking knew if we waited 5 minutes I would be fine. I tried telling my mom this and she was having none of it. I even tried to just stall her by begging. Nope. Got dragged. Not literally lol. Out of the hotel and into the car. We pull out of the parking lot and get T-boned so hard we do a 180 into oncoming traffic. As soon as we all realized we were okay, I was like, yep, there it is. I've never let either of them forget it either lol. One of the biggest downsides I've seen is someone that doesn't smoke but who had many friends that do, is it becomes an obsession or crutch. What I mean by this, most of my friends can't get through the day without smoking pot. They constantly need it for stress or irritation. And by doing this it becomes an obsession. For many, including people I've dated, is all they care about doing. Going to their bestie's house and smoking pot. That's literally it. I'm not saying this end up being everyone, but it is many. I'm afraid of roller coasters. Mostly heights, but they go hand in hand. My friends and I went to a theme park and went on one that was in darkness and went underground. I rode it once, sitting in the back, and really enjoyed it surprisingly. When we reached the start again, there was no line, as it was the end of the day. So they asked if we wanted a final go before they shut down. Something in my gut told me not to go on, so, despite my friends nagging, I didn't and waited with the bags. My friends came back around a few minutes later, white as a sheet. About 3/4 of the way through the ride, there's a big drop, then it goes fast, and just before that, my friend in the back spa had risen up. Apparently they had to grip onto her for the rest of the ride whilst trying to push the bar back down. Many people just smoke instead of dealing with their problems on arteries. I'll see people post GF. Just broke up with me. Getting high AF. I treat it like I would alcohol, only on the weekends and occasionally during the weekdays. And just to have fun and not escape my current life situation. Marijuana definitely needs to be studied more. Up until recently, there haven't been very many scientific studies on the effects of marijuana due to legal issues in the US. That said, there is moderate evidence that acute marijuana use can impair learning, memory, and attention, leading to a reasonable argument that it shouldn't be consumed by those under about 25 since the brain is still developing during that time. Cannabis-induced dissociation can completely ruin your life. If you smoke it way too often, your shorter-term memory gets fucked. Seriously. There was a period in my life when I smoked for 2 months straight. Almost a gram a day. My memory was non-existent then. I work in consulting, so I realized it was fucking with my job. So I had to quit. Weed is good. Just don't overdo it. I matched with a guy on Tinder. We exchanged messages, and everything was fine. Normal. We decided we would meet up for coffee in a week. A few days after we arranged the coffee date, he messaged me saying his father had passed away in those few days. He couldn't meet me in public. He could only meet me in private at his apartment. I trusted my gut, sent my condolences, but said I couldn't meet him somewhere private. He tried to tell me I could trust him because he had a dog. I still declined. He got really aggressive and started messaging me horrible things. He called me every name in the book. I ended up blocking him. I tried to find him later on, and he basically never existed. He could have blocked me on all social media, but I couldn't find a trace of him anywhere. I don't know what the outcome would have been, but I just couldn't do it. Wife called me while I was at work, just to say she was home from her night shift and planning to go to bed. She had worked night shift for years and never called me just to say she was home and going to bed. Before, she also sounded weirdly detached on the call. I asked her if she was okay. She said yes, just really sleepy. I got a weird feeling and told her I was going to leave work and come home. She told me I didn't need to. I said okay, and then I left work and rushed home anyway. Found a suicide note taped to the garage door. I got to her in time, rushed her to the ER, and it got her the help she needed. A week of inpatient psych, followed by changes to medications and doctors. This was about 5 months ago, and she is so much better now. I used to just drive around country roads when I would feel stressed out or sad as a way to just get away and listen to music. One evening I was driving with my best friend in the car and we're on a gravel road that has a huge hill. We were driving towards the sunset, but it was winter and the light was fading fast as the car started down the hill. I had this moment where I thought to myself, my brights should be on, and I flicked them on, and at the bottom of this super steep hill stood 6 deer on the road. I slammed on the brakes and the car turned sideways and skidded to a stop like 4 feet from the deer. Those stupid deer didn't even move. They just stared into the passenger side of my car, and my best friend pointed at them and said, "Hey, dear." The car was fine. We were fine. And Bambi was all good. I don't drive around like that anymore. My mum and her entire family were saved from dying from carbon monoxide poisoning by her dad. He left for work, got a weird feeling and drove back home. Everyone in the house was unconscious, and he had to drag or carry them all outside one by one. They all survived. My sister, since she was about 5, was always obsessed with tsunamis and would always ask my dad every night before she went to sleep if there would be a tsunami that night. We lived on a beach. About 5 years later, when our family was holidaying in Samoa, an earthquake struck at about 6 a.m. It was only a dull low rumble but went on for over a minute. Everyone at the resort woke up and went outside for a few minutes, then went back to bed. My sister, having been obsessed with tsunamis, ran down to look at the water and noticed the sea going out and saved a lot of lives, including my own. There was about a minute from her noticing till the tsunami hit. Luckily for us, there was a cliff right behind the resort. If not, a lot more people would have been killed. So something like a gut feeling 5 years in the making. Not me, but my science teacher. When she was a teenager, she was standing near some lights at a pedestrian crossing with her and her friend. Very chill, but out of nowhere she had this gut feeling that both of them had to move. They moved just a couple meters away, and the next moment a car had hit another car and had hit one of the street electricity utility poles, and it had fell and exploded. Minor explosion enough distance away that it didn't hurt the girls exactly where they were. One of the wires had also snapped and hit it exactly where they were standing as well. They basically were in a scene of car wreckage and snapped wires and electricity explosions and the pole collapse. Just real insane. If the pole had missed them, the wire would have hit him, and if not that, then most likely the cars. That gut feeling of moving away saved both of them. I remember this story so clearly from high school science class because it was such a WTF. Pity I only paid attention to these things and not actually science, hee hee. been smoking every day for the past decade and am recently realizing that being too introspective can be a negative thing at times. I've been thinking too much and acting too little.